you see that. Okay, great. I think we can move on from here. Okay, right. Thank you. So mainly at this point, because we have people who are either deciding to code or program, it means that you know what a program is, right? You know what coding is. So I'm not going into those definitions and details as to how Python is written or how Python is interpreted, right? So I wouldn't go into those definitions and that kind of information. We'll go straight to syntax and some things that you just need to know about Python. So first off, I would assume that you all know or you have a program where you can write in a Python code, right? If you don't, we are not going to go into installation here, but what I can do is I'm just going to put some links in the chat where you can use the program that I'm using currently. So currently what I am using is VS Code, that is Visual Studio Code. I'm using it in conjunction with Jupyter Notebook. Okay, so these two, you can use them separately. You can use Jupyter Notebook on its own to write Python codes, and you can also use Visual Studio on its own to write Python code. The good thing with integration and collaboration, Visual Studio Code, VS Code, and Jupyter Notebook kind of work together, right? So I do have Jupyter Notebook, but it's within it's within VS Code for me, and I do enjoy this environment. So that's what you'll be seeing here. But it shouldn't be different from any other Python IDE or any other editor you would use, right? And there are so many out there, so you can install. So I'm just going to put in the links that I have here for Visual Studio Code. If you do not have any application to write your code, you can use Visual Studio Code. And there's also Jupyter where you can install it. One of the great things I like about Jupyter is the fact that sometimes probably you don't have a machine or you're using something that is not yours and you want to write some quick Python. You can also use it in your browser, right? So you don't need to install anything, right? You can just use it in your browser and go ahead and write your Python code. Okay. All right, so let's just move on. I think I need to get a participant here in case somebody raises the hand. I can see that. Okay, right. So let's just go straight into values, to types, to variables, operators, and comments, right? This is like the basics in terms of the syntax for Python, what you need to know. If you are writing some programming, means you are dealing with some information, right? And the information you're dealing with it's of some value, right? So either it's numbers, either it's text, either it's some decimals or some true or false, right? So all these are values that you are dealing with in your program or the application you want to write. It's dealing with some information, right? So this information, this data has some value. So in Python, you have these values that you can represent and you can interact with. Okay, and these values have specific types in terms of how Python would understand or know what it can be done, right? In terms of if you are doing an addition, you know that additions are only done on numbers, right? Be it decimal, whole numbers, that is what can be done. And Python knows that, okay, if this is a number value, then I know I can perform an addition on it, right? If it's a text, okay, we definitely can't add A plus B in terms of how numerical additions work, right? And since there's no hex too, it wouldn't work. So now Python knows, okay, this value is a string. Okay, so what does addition mean here in terms of a string, right? So that's why values and types are important. So your program or Python would understand that, okay, this is the value we have and this is what can be performed on it, or this is what you want to perform on it. Okay, so just to explain, I think I've mentioned some of them already, but I'm just going to talk about it. So the values that we have text, right, which is string. So if I have some string type, so I'm just writing here, I'm going to get these size because this is where code is supposed to be, and I'm writing string, and string doesn't exist. Okay, okay. So VS Code is not allowing me to do that. So let me write it somewhere where it will be easier. So we have string, and then we have integers. Okay, so int. So integers here, and then we have decimals, which in Python we would say floats. Okay, so we have floats, and then again we have Boolean. Okay, so these are the main types that we're going to talk about. There are other complex types, but we will not be talking about that at this point in terms of basics. So the main things that we are looking at is string, integers, floats, and Boolean. And when we talk about string here is any alphanumeric character, okay? And for you to define that in Python, it means that for Python to identify that this value you have here as a string, it is wrapped around either a single quote or a double quote. So if I have something like testing this is a string. So Python sees this and says that, okay, this is a string. This is actually a text. So everything in between these single quotes is that our text value or our string value. Okay. In the same way, if I said testing this one here, or I have one here. So far as it's within the single quotes, Python will see all this as string. Okay. So as human, I would see one here. I say, okay, actually that's a number, right? Because I know one is a number. But Python would understand that everything within this quote or within the single quotes or the double quotes are string. Okay, so this is just a string value you have here. So I could have this here being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, okay, enter. Okay, so I have this here, and a human being probably seeing this, you know, some numbers that have been put together, right? But so far as it's within our quotes, Python sees this as a string value. Okay, so just so that you know that anything within a single or double quote here would be string values. Okay. That aside, we have, if I have numbers, so I have 1, I have 2, you see that's not qualified with any string or any other value. So 2, -1. Okay, so let's go here. -1. These are integers. Okay, so Python sees this and knows that, okay, this value is an integer type. Okay. Same way, the moment I have 1.0, if I put points there, the moment I add that, it becomes a float. Okay, so 1.0, 3.0, okay, 3.5, all these are float values that Python would see. Okay, so this is just what we see. So for us as humans, you see 1, you see 1.0, you know it's the same thing. Okay, it's the same value. But then these are different types. When it's Python will see these as different types. Okay, so we have some examples of strings, integers, floats, now Boolean. So Boolean is a true or false value. Okay, so in Python you have true, and then you have false. Oh, wait. My enter key is not cooperating here, and we have where is enter? Okay, enter. Okay, we have true and we have false. So having true and having false, this is a value type, right? So this is a Boolean, this is a Boolean, right? So when Python sees true, it knows that, okay, there's a value of type true, right? So it's a Boolean type and the value is true. And then false is a Boolean type and the value is true, okay? So at this point, I think in terms of the values, what they are and the types, we've gone over the 4 basic ones, okay? So that is just for us to have this basic information, right? So we know the values, we know the types. Okay, so it's easier to write the rest of the code because this is like the basis of everything that you would write because you're dealing with some information, be it text, be it integers or floats or Boolean. Okay, so then we can move on. So I've already talked about values, I've talked about types here, okay. Then the next thing I want to talk about is variables, okay. So I mentioned values, types, so variables, and then we talk about operators and comments. So variables in any programming language, what a variable is more of, let me use the simplest word I would use would probably be a container, a named container. Okay, so there is some I think that's the simplest way to explain it. So you have a container that has some name, okay? So this container would either contain some values, okay? In Python, it's not exactly that, but then I think we can go with the container analogy. So it's a named container. So it's the same as you having containers out there and just labeling them. So the moment you look at your label, your container of label, let's say numbers, right? Let me call it numbers. I think numbers might be confusing. So container of label may be height, right? If I say container of label height, the moment I call height, I'm talking about what height contains, right? So if height contains water, it's water that I'm actually referring to here. So the moment I say container label height has water, right? So water is what I want to deal with, and not actually the name or the container, okay? All right, so bringing that analogy here in Python, when we talk about variables, these are names that we give to some values. So some values that we are storing and labeling them, right? So we label it with a name so that later on we can use it again just by calling that name, okay? So in Python, the easy way for you to just create this variable is just pick your name, right? I think there are some conventions around the names that variable names I'm not going to talk about here. Like you can start with a number and things like that. So if I have a name, so let's say right now, I'm creating a variable of weight, right? So this is the name I want to give to the value I want to store. So I want to store probably my weight, right? So 69. Right, so I'm storing this value 69, and I think what we've just mentioned, 69 here is a value type integer, right? I'm storing it or I'm giving it this name, right? I'm storing it in this container called weight, okay? So Python now sees that, okay, anytime I see weight, we're actually referring to this value here that we've stored in it, which is 69, okay? Right, so this is just for you to understand what variables are, or understand how Python would work with variables. Okay. One other thing to just note, because I said I didn't talk about the initial aspects of Python in this case, but one other thing to note is Python is case sensitive. So I have weight here being capital W. If I have weight being small w here, these are two different things. Python does not see this weight and this weight as the same thing. They are different, okay? They are different because of the case change. So if I were to just make it capital, now Python will recognize that I'm referring to the same thing. So just be mindful of cases in Python, okay? All right, so we have variable here, weight, 69, and I have height. For now, you don't see me printing more of outputting anything. At this point, I'm just writing in statements and how things should be. Okay, yes, I think we have a great question from Nat. Yes, so Python is case sensitive for everything, yes, including Booleans. So a capital true being capital T is what Python sees as a Boolean type. The moment you make it small t, it doesn't know that value. Okay, so that's not a Boolean value when you change it from capital T to small t. Okay, right. So okay, we are writing okay, we're writing, I think I have some other comments. Okay, Mary says, okay, you're writing it like notes. Yes. So currently that is what I'm doing. We do not have a full program yet, right? So currently what I'm doing is just showing you some of the things we would write. We would have an example program where we would use this, okay? It's just showing you how you would write something like that, okay? So I think at this point, this was me just showing you the values and how you would write them in Python. This section with me talking about a variable and saying equal to and putting the value there. This whole line here, this is a statement, right? So this is what you say, a single statement in Python. Okay, so I've just written one line of code, which is a statement, and that is saying weight equal to 69. Okay, so value is here, your variable is here, the equal to assigns a value to your variable. Okay, so that is how you would write it in Python. Okay, when we go to do maybe a code example, then you'd see how you would do that for multiple things. Okay, so let's say height is 69. Maybe I want to say age being my variable. Okay, so age is 20. Let's assume I'm 20, right? So so age is 20 here, meaning that I've assigned the value 20 to this variable here called age. Okay, so this would be how you would more of create variables in Python and assign a value to them. Okay, so that's how it is. The other thing with Python is also the fact that the value you assign to the variable determines the data type of your variable, right? So we've talked about data types already, which is we have strings, integers, floats, Boolean. Okay, so for Python, unlike other programming languages where you'd have to state that, okay, this variable I'm going to create is maybe an integer type. Python, you wouldn't specify it beforehand. What you do is you just end up writing your variable name and you assign a value to it. So the value that you assign to it determines the data type of the variable. So my value being integers here means that my weight, my age variables are integers. Okay, so if I have another variable called let's see, variable names are always tricky. So let's see, is it okay? So yeah, I just came up with this, right? So wait, is it okay? This is my variable name, and I assign that to true. Okay, so now my is it okay variable would have a data type of Boolean because it has a value of true. Okay, and my name variable here would be equal to here, meaning that my name variable here is of type string. Okay, all right, so that's it for variables and how you would assign a value to them, how you'd create them. Okay, now I think we can move on since I don't want to clear this, so let me just add another section here. Okay, and the way this is and the way I'm doing all this is because I'm using Jupyter Notebook. Jupyter Notebook gives you this whole sessions where you could, it's more like a notebook form. Okay, so that is how you see it this way. Your other editors may not look like this, but that is okay. You can still write the same code there. So now that we are done with variables, we can look at operators. Okay, so for operators here, we've talked about some information, there's some data that your application is going to deal with. You're going to perform some operations on them, be it an addition, be it a subtraction, be it picking two text values and concatenating them, like adding them together to form one long sentence, right? So that's an operation you're going to do. Multiplication, division, whatever it is that you do. There are some operations that you can perform in Python, and it is inbuilt, right? Python already understands them. And these operations are also based on your data type. Okay, so if it is string, you can perform specific operations, right? Like you can perform subtraction on string. It doesn't make sense, right? So based on the data type, you can perform some specific operations. So let's look at some of the operations that we can have. We are not going to go through all the operations that are there, just the simple ones that we will need in the application that we are going to create. Okay. So our operations here, what we're going to deal with is for additions, right? So additions, I mean, in terms of what we know addition to be, can only be performed on integers and floats, okay? So Python understands 1 + 1, right? So the moment I do 1 + 1 here, Python would understand this. Okay, so let me just run this one so that we would see. This is my output here, so I get 2, right? So I did 1 + 1, Python knows that is 2, so that makes sense. if I do 1.2 plus 3.2, Python understands this, right? That's addition. So it does that for you seamlessly. For integers and floats, this is how it would understand it. For strings, the same plus sign, okay, so we have these operated. The same plus sign means something else, right? So for string, when you pick one string and you're adding another string to it, how Python sees that is concatenation, right? So that's how you refer to concatenation, like pick that string, add the string to it, okay? So add it from the end, okay? So in this case, let's say I have my first name, okay? So let's see, my first name being Akua, and I'm not going to add space because I want you to know how Python would understand that. My middle name being Oseiwaah, right? So I just did Akua plus Oseiwaah here, right? And these are strings, and we can add them in Python. And as I said, that is concatenation. So concatenation in Python, so it just picks Akua, it takes Oseiwaah, these two texts, and it just adds them into one single text. Okay. So there is no, because I didn't add space, Python is not going to think, it sees that, okay, this is what you're telling me. Akua, this text, this characters together, and these characters, just add them. Right? It's not going to add automatic space for you, right? So you have to think about it and say, okay, if I want to do this and I want a space, I'm either adding a space before this one or after this. That would work. There are other ways that you can add a space, but for now, we'll do with this one. So just add space, and now I have space in between. Okay. So whilst we've already talked about these operations, and right now I just dealt with the actual values, right? I didn't use variables here in any way. I just dealt with the actual values. The same thing can be done with variables. As I said, variables are just values that have labels. Okay, so if I now say first name, a variable called first name is equal to Akua, right? And variable called middle name is equal to Oseiwaah, right? And now I would say that first name, so first name, I have this here so that I don't get to type everything. First name plus middle name. Okay, so what I've just done here, all these 3 lines of code here is the same as this. Okay, all these 3 lines of code here is the same as this. So you probably be wondering, okay, if I can write it in 1 line, why would we spend time and write it in 3 lines, right? So there are some advantages with using variables. As I said, you can reuse it. So if I were to call Akua or say, well, the same value somewhere else, if I was writing a long lines of code and I have to call them, I don't have to type this whole value and all this value again. I can just say first name, middle name, and automatically to pick that value for me. Okay, so being able to reuse variables is one of the advantages why you would put a value in a variable instead of like using the value directly. Okay, so let's go with this. So we have the same output we had initially. Okay, so if I add space, there are multiple ways I can add space, but let's go with the one we already know. So let me add a space here and run this again. And we have the same thing happening. Okay, same thing worked. So we've seen how these operations would work. So there's the plus, there's the subtraction, addition, subtraction, division. So for numbers, you have all those that can work. Probably one of the interesting operators that I would include here, there are just 2 of them that I'm going to include in terms of Python. But our usual multiplication, subtraction, divisions are all there. They work, right? They work the way they're supposed to work if you're using numbers. So when it comes to multiplication, there's one interesting multiplication multiplying strings, right? So there's some multiplication operation on strings that I think is interesting. So I'm just going to spend some time on that. So you can actually multiply a string value with a number, right? And Python sees that as you want it to be repeated. Okay, so maybe I want to say okay, right? I want okay, and we already talked about concatenation. Okay, so it's like taking that value, concatenating it the number of times you want it. Okay, so if I say I want okay, I think okay probably not make sense. Let's do ha, right? So I'm doing like ha ha ha. So I want this like 5 times or 3 times. I can just multiply by 3, and Python will see that, okay, take this ha and just concatenate it 3 times. Okay, so let's do that. So yes, I have ha. So if I wanted it to be 20, instead of having to type these 2 characters 20 times, I can just put it there and just do a multiplication, and it does that for me. Okay, so that is one interesting way of multiplying strings. Okay, and that is the only way you can actually perform multiplication on strings. It's multiplying it with a number. You can multiply a string with another string. Okay, all right, so that aside, the other operators that I would want to talk about with integers and decimals and floats. I'm going to use the right data type names. So using ints, integers, and floats. The other operators that are interesting is the modulo, right? So that is the person this. So modulo being let's pick a value. So if I were to say 5 modulo 2, right? So modulo being modulo. So if I have like 5 modulo 2 being when you divide 5 by 2, what remainder would you get? Okay, so we know division, you have your quotient and you have your remainder. Okay, so this is, I want to see the remainder for 5 divided by 2. Okay, in this case, it would be 1. So you get the value 1 because that is the remainder, right? If there is no remainder, you get your 0. Okay, so if it was 6, 6 is divisible by 2. So when you do that, you get 0. And this modulo really helps if you're writing an application where you'd want to find maybe even numbers or something like that, like you're finding odd numbers or even numbers. The modulo would be the operation you probably use, right? Because you know even numbers are divisible by 2. So anything when modulo 2 is 0 would be your even number, right? And if it's not 0, it means it's an odd number. Okay, so that's like one interesting operator that is in Python. The other one with Python is also to just get the quotient for division. So usually if you were to say 5 divided by 2 using just the division, you would get a decimal, right? That is 2.5. But if what you want is just the 2, right? The 2 aspects, you just want the quotient, you don't want the remainder. What you do in Python is 2 division signs and say 2. So 5 with 2 division means that, okay, just give me the quotient. I don't want anything except that. Okay, so these are like some interesting aspects with the operators in Python. So now I do think for our first part being variables, operators, and types, we are like, we've gone through all that. As I said, if there are any questions, you can put them in the chat. Last, not the least, is adding comments. So usually for the code that you'd write, sometimes to help yourself or help somebody else you'd be working with, you want to put in some comments, right? So comments being notes on what you are trying to do in the code, so that if you were to come back like a year later or some months later, you actually understand what you were thinking at that point in time when you were writing that code, or your colleague would know what your thought process was for writing that code. And these lines are not seen as code by Python. So the moment you put in a hash, so you have a hash and you type whatever you want to type, you can type that and still run. You're not going to get any error regardless of what you write there, because it's not seen as code. Okay, it doesn't have to be, it can be a line on its own. It doesn't have to be, I know this one I added it to the statement I already had. So I just don't want you to think that that's the only way you can get that. So this is whatever you want to write. Okay, so that's it for comments. I think we can now move on to some interesting aspects. Oh, we have some few minutes to go. Okay, so let me just move on to some interesting aspects. I think we can only cover this part and just write like a simple code to perform some function. So I'm just going to go show you how to output something in Python. Okay, so in Python is print. Okay, so you see that in this case I have like 1 plus 2 and all this showing this value when I run. This is also some feature with Jupyter Notebook, right? Not all IDEs or not all editors would work this way for you if you do not use the word print. Okay, so the print keyword or the print function, the right term is a function. So the print function in Python, built-in function in Python, what it does is to output something to the screen. Okay, so output something for my case, this is where my output shows. So output it here, output it there, or if you're using a different application, you would have some output there where you get to see it. Okay, so print is outputting something, and this is how that is written. So if I want to print something out, I just write, and as I said, Python is case sensitive. So that's okay, that's fine. So usually you want to print a text. Okay, so I'm just going with this for now, and let me see. Okay, so I just did print test for now. But it to be usually, I think what people would say is hello world or something. So let's say hello women who code Accra. Okay, so hello women who code Accra. So this is what you would output, and this is what you would want to show. If it was an application, probably you want to output your a welcome message, some value after calculation, whatever it is, you would use the print to show that. Okay. Okay, all right, great. Okay, great. Mary, okay, so you're saying that in a follow-up email, you'd get some links, okay, on the best practice of writing Python. Okay, all right, great. Mary will do that. So your print would be outputting some information, okay, and outputting for your screen or whatever it is some text value you're trying to output, right? So I say hello, women who code Accra here, and it shows up. If I were to say print to, because it's just a single data type like this, Python would intrinsically like convert that to string. Okay, so what it's going to do, although I'm writing 2 here, which is an integer, it would automatically convert it to a string and output it, right? But then the moment I mix in strings and integers, it becomes a bit confusing for Python. So if you were doing anything, you probably might get an error. Like the moment you mix those two, it has to be of the same data type. So if it is, let me see let's just put it here and see how this would work here. So if I were to say, so I'm saying I want to say hello to, but because I know hello is a string, I ended up putting this quote around it, and the 2, I didn't do anything, right? So now there's an error because now Python is confused. What are you trying to do here, right? So there's a string, there's an integer, like doesn't make sense. Okay, so Python wouldn't understand that. So if you would want, you definitely would want to change everything to string or convert it to string. Okay, all right, so either this is the right thing because of what I wanted to do. There are other ways you would probably go around this, depending on what you want to do. But this is just to introduce you to the print function, right? The built-in function in Python, and whatever is within this bracket, and the right data type, Python would output it for you. Okay. So for now, because of time, I was going to show the input, but let's go with print, because now we know what values are, we know what variables are, we know what operations are, and we know how to print. Let's just go ahead and okay, all right, great. I know, am I missing anything in the chat? Please, if I'm missing anything, just send me a message here. Okay. All right. So just to move on from there, we know something, we know all these basic features and functionalities of Python now. So we can write a program. At this point, we can actually write some code to do something, right? It might not be as complex as experts would do, but yes, we can still write some code. Okay, so let's go straight into writing and creating our first simple program. Okay, it will not be many lines of code here, but then let's go with, I think, BMI, right? So I think that's one of the easy ones that we can work with. There are multiple programs you can write with what we have currently, but let's go with BMI, right? So I think that is body mass index, okay? And for BMI, okay. All right, Maria, senior. So for BMI, we have so let's just say our application here is a BMI application. That's what we're going to write. Okay. All right. So BMI app. Okay. This is our beginner's version, right? Version V. Okay, so our beginner's version for BMI, right? And what is BMI? How is BMI calculated? I believe it is actually wait, who has the formula for BMI? No, I know one is squared, but I'm kind of forgetting if it is height by weight or okay, all right. I do know that. So let me just confirm. I know it's either height divided by weight squared or weight divided by height squared. So I want to be sure of what I'm saying here. Okay. All right. So BMI is I think there's something you can find online easily. Okay, so it's actually weight divided by, yes. So weight divided by height squared. Great, thank you, Nat. So we have weight, those in US and other places that use a different units. I think you may probably have to convert it to your units. In this case, I'm going with the kg, the kilograms, and the meters squared. Okay, so so it's height, weight squared, right? So let's just say it's the same as height times height. Okay, right. So that also brings me to the fact that I didn't show you how to do squared or exponent. So I will actually talk about that as well. So we have a BMI app that we want to create, and the information we need here is we just need weight, we just need height, and we can calculate a BMI and get that value out. Okay. At the moment, we are beginners, so we haven't gotten to the point where we can ask our user or whoever will be using our application to enter the value. Now, all we know is just variables. So what we can do is just put in a fixed value from the beginning, and it can't be changed by a user. Okay, so as I said, that's the beginner's version. We can always improve upon it as we learn more. So now we need weight. in kg. So we have a variable called weight. So our first line is to get the weight. Okay, so our weight being 69 kilogram. Okay, all right. Okay, yes. Mary, thank you. So our weight is being 69 kilograms currently, and we have our height. So our height variable is where we will store our height value. So let's say our height being in meters. Currently, let's say we have height, just to add a little bit of extra operations to this code. Let's say we know that our users will know their height in centimeters instead of meters. So let's go with centimeters. Okay. So our height is, let's see, 170 centimeters. Okay. We do know that to get BMI, it should be weight in kilograms divided by height squared, and height is supposed to be in meters. So now, how do we get our height in meters? We can convert it, right? So that should be simple. So let me just say height cm to make it like centimeters height. So now converting our centimeters height into our meters height, which would be height. Okay, I'm add an m here, meters. This is going to be our centimeters height divided, right? So this is going to be our centimeters height divided by 100. Okay, so we would go with centimeters height. So instead of writing 170, in this case, what we're going to do is we already have a variable with that value. So we are picking our variable and then we are dividing it by 100. Okay, so the moment we pick this variable and we divide by 100, the final value would be stored in this new variable, meaning a height in meters. Okay, so we know that we have that, right? So let's see, just to add comments here so it makes much more sense. So convert okay, so now that we are done with that, the next thing is to actually calculate our BMI. So calculate BMI, and we can simply do that with our new variable called BMI. So our new variable is called BMI, and we see that it's going to be weight, right? So our weight divided by, I'm putting brackets around it just to be extra cautious with Python. Yeah, so unnecessary, but let's do that. So it says height in meters, right? So height in meters times height in meters is squared. And we have that. And now we can print this out on our screen. Thank you. We can print this out on our screen and see print out BMI. Okay. And this is a simple application to calculate BMI for a weight of 69 kilograms and height of 170 centimeters. Okay, so we can just run this. And I think if you follow through already, our output is just going to be our BMI value. Okay, so as I said, extremely simple. This is something that can always be improved on. Okay, so so if you have a weight of 69, height of 170 centimeters, your BMI is going to be this value. Okay, we can embellish this a bit. I think we are already over time, but let me just make some few changes here. So height multiplied by height, I mentioned, is squared. Okay. All right, got that. Okay. All right, so height multiplied by height squared, right? So height multiplied by height squared. So let's do this. So what we're going to do is what we're going to do is use the operation for squared in Python instead of doing the height multiplied by height, right? So Python, if you are using this sign, so this operator, so if I have height, my variable or whichever value it is, squared or exponent, whichever exponent, so exponent 2, this is how you would write it in Python. Okay, so weight, height in meters squared, and this should give us the same value. Okay. So actually, it didn't work with this one. Okay, let's go with that other one. Since that didn't work, I don't want to go through finding out why it didn't work. So let's just go ahead with that. Okay, so let's go with a simple one here. And as I mentioned earlier, because I don't have my codes, my value is getting messed up. Okay, so that's why it's good to also have your codes around. Okay, so let's go with our height. So our weight divided by our height squared. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Lena. That is the correct. I was using the value for something. I was using the operator for something, some other language. So that is okay. So yes, Lena, thank you for that. So it's having our multiplication 2 times. So if you have our multiplication 2 times, then it makes it exponent. Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay, so this would be the same thing. This would be the same thing. I think at this point we can probably end this, but then there's some embellishment that we probably want to add to that. So let's say BMI. I had mentioned already that we can have some text, right? So in printing, let's just do print. Let's do print. So let's say this is your BMI, and so this is your BMI, then we have the value here. Okay, so this is what would show. There's a lot of improvements that can be done on this. There are multiple things in terms of getting the input from the user, the text parts, having a better way of writing this. I wanted it in multiple lines. That's why I have it this way. We could have it in one line. We could add more information to this. Okay, but this would be our first and simple program in Python for what we've learned so far. And I think we're already 9 minutes past time, so I would end here. And if you have any question, we can you can ask at this point. I know there were some in the chat. Previously, so
hello.
Hi.
Please could you share like some more learning resources, like maybe to the documentation or like to a website where we can learn more on the on syntax, so we can like stay updated.
Okay, all right, great. So let me see. There's this interactive. I think one of the places that is really good and interactive for me, if you know DataCamp. DataCamp has some tutorials on Python, which I think for me helped a lot. So you can use that. I know Udemy and the other learning platforms, they do have that as well. But DataCamp for me really helped. It's free for you to learn. So I think it's just datacamp.com. Okay, so I mean, I didn't have to type a lot and it came up because I use that a lot. So if you go to DataCamp, you can just start learning for free, and there are Python curriculum there is really good and simple. There is this link I have here for Runestone Academy, which is more of an interactive. It's an interactive book. Okay, so it's an interactive book, which you can probably check this out as well. Okay, so I think the way they also explain that is very simple, especially for a beginner. It's extremely simple for Runestone. So these are the two I can probably recommend at this point because I've used them and for me it helped. I know we all have different ways of learning, but then you can also try it out and see.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. Any other question? Okay, so let's see, there's some in the chat. Okay, all right, there's none. So we can end today's session. We said 1 hour, we already past time. So this is our first part, which is just the introduction, and what we've done today was just simple introducing the values, the data types, operations, how to write comments, and then we also learned how to print out some value. Okay, so that is all we've done. Our next session on Python, we will build on this. Okay, and thank you everybody for participating. I hope you learned a lot. I know it isn't for some of you already know the basics. You probably already know this, but then I hope this helped a lot. Okay.